Henry Caldwell sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, his head buried in his hands. Bills piled up on the coffee table, each one demanding payment he couldn't afford. His job at the factory barely kept the lights on, and his dreams of a better life seemed more distant with each passing day. He had tried everything: overtime at work, selling off his belongings, even gambling, but nothing could lift him from the pit he had dug himself into. The weight of his hopelessness was crushing, and he felt his soul teetering on the edge of something terrible. One night, after a particularly grueling day, Henry found himself at the local bar. He drank alone, nursing a cheap whiskey as his mind churned with hate and despair. The bartender, a grizzled old man with a knowing look, watched him silently. "You look like a man who's run out of options," the bartender finally said, his voice rough as gravel. Henry glanced up, meeting the old man's gaze. "Why do you care?" The bartender shrugged. "Seen your kind before. Desperation does strange things to a man. Makes him do things he never thought he'd do."
Henry scoffed. "What would you know about it?"
The bartender leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "I know more than you'd think. Sometimes when a man's got nothing left to lose, he'll turn to unconventional methods." "What are you talking about?" Henry asked, his interest peaked now. "I'm talking about making a deal with someone who can give you everything you want: money, power, respect. All it'll cost you is something you don't even value anymore." Henry frowned. "And what's that?"
"Your soul."
He wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss the bartender as a crackpot, but something in the bartender's expression told him this was no joke. Who would I have to talk to?" Henry asked nervously, his voice barely above a whisper. The bartender gave him a piece of paper across the bar. "Go to this address at midnight, but be sure it's what you really want. Once you make the deal, there's no turning back." Henry stared at the paper, his hands trembling. The address was in the darkest part of town, a place he had always avoided, but the thought of escaping his miserable life was too tempting to resist. That night, as the clock struck midnight, Henry found himself standing outside a decrepit building in a forgotten alley. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the shadows seemed to pulse with a life of their own. He hesitated, fear gnawing at his insides, but the memory of his mounting debts and the crushing weight of his failure pushed him forward. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the door creaked open, revealing a tall figure cloaked in darkness. "Come in," a voice whispered from the shadows. The door slammed shut behind him, plunging the room into near darkness. A single candle flickered on a table in the center of the room, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Seated at the table was a man, if he could be called that. His skin was deathly pale, his eyes black as coal, and his smile was the stuff of nightmares. "Henry Caldwell," the man said, his voice smooth as silk. "I've been expecting you." Henry's breath caught in his throat. "How do you know my name?" The man chuckled softly. "I know everything about you. Your struggles, your failures, your desires. And I know why you're here." I need help," Henry stammered. "I need money, power, anything to change my life." "And you're willing to pay the price?" the man asked, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. Henry hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. But then he thought of the life he could have, the wealth, the respect, the freedom from his endless misery. "Yes," he whispered, "I'm willing." The man's smile widened, revealing teeth that were unnaturally sharp. "Excellent. The terms are simple. I will give you everything you desire. In return, your soul will belong to me. When the time comes, I will claim it." Henry's heart raced. When will that be?" The man leaned in closer, his cold breath brushing against Henry's cheek. "You'll know when the time is right." Before Henry could respond, the man produced a piece of parchment from the shadows, along with a quill. The parchment was covered in writing that seemed to writhe and twist before his eyes, and at the bottom was a blank space for his signature. Henry's hand shook as he took the quill. He hesitated for a moment, his mind screaming at him to stop, to turn back before it was too late. But the lure of wealth and power was too strong. With a trembling hand, he signed his name. As soon as the ink dried, the man let out a low, sinister smile. The parchment burst into flames, disintegrating before Henry's eyes. The man's form began to change, his features becoming more distorted, his eyes glowing with an evil light.
It is done,
the man said, his voice now a deep, guttural growl. Enjoy your new life, Henry Caldwell. But remember, when the time comes, I will be back for what is mine. Before Henry could react, the man vanished, leaving him alone in the darkness. The room seemed to close in on him, and for a moment he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. But then, as if by magic, the room began to transform. The dilapidated walls faded away, replaced by the luxurious surroundings of a grand mansion. Henry looked down at himself, realizing he was now dressed in a fine suit, his hands adorned with expensive rings. He rushed to a mirror, barely recognizing the wealthy, powerful man staring back at him. Henry's life changed overnight. He went from a man struggling to make ends meet to a wealthy tycoon with influence in every corner of the city. He bought a sprawling mansion, the finest cars, and anything his heart desired. No longer did he worry about bills or debts. Now he commanded respect and fear wherever he went. He reveled in his newfound status, throwing lavish parties, indulging in every vice he had ever craved, and basking in the adoration of those who once looked down on him. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, a shadow began to creep over Henry's new life. It started with the nightmares, dark, twisted visions that plagued his sleep. In his dreams, he was chased by a scary creature, his eyes glowing with an evil light. No matter how fast he ran, it was always right behind him, its hands reaching out to drag him into the abyss. Henry would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. But the nightmares were just the beginning. Soon, strange things began happening during the day as well. He would catch glimpses of something out of the corner of his eye, something dark and menacing that vanished as soon as he turned to look. Objects in his home would move on their own, and he would hear whispers in the dead of night, voices that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. Henry had sensed it that something was coming for him. One night, after another restless sleep, Henry awoke to find a figure standing at the foot of his bed. His heart nearly stopped as he recognized the man from the night he made the deal, the one who had promised him everything in exchange for his soul. "It's time," the figure said, his voice cold and final. "Your soul belongs to me."
Henry was horrified. "No! You said I'd know when the time was right, and I'm not ready."
The figure's eyes glowed with a sinister glint. "You've had your time, Henry Caldwell. Now it's time to pay the price." "Please, there must be another way. I'll do anything. Just give me more time," Henry pleaded. The figure shook his head slowly. "There is no other way. The deal is done. Your soul is mine." "No! I won't let you take me!" With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Henry bolted for the door, but the figure was faster. The shadows seemed to come alive, wrapping around Henry and pulling him back into the room. As the shadows closed in around him, Henry could feel his soul being torn from his body. The pain was unbearable, a burning agony that seared through him like fire. His vision blurred, and the last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was the figure's cold, triumphant smile. When Henry awoke, he was no longer in his luxurious mansion. Instead, he found himself in a barren wasteland, the sky a sickly shade of red, and the ground cracked and scorched. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur, and the heat was oppressive, like the very air was on fire. He stumbled to his feet, disoriented and terrified. "Where am I?" he muttered, his voice trembling. A low, sinister laugh echoed around him, and Henry spun around to see the figure from before, now fully revealed in his true form. The man's pale skin had turned ashen, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Welcome to your new home, Henry Caldwell," the figure said, his voice dripping with bitterness. "This is the hell you bargained for." Henry's heart dropped into his stomach. He had heard the stories, the warnings about making deals with the devil, but he had never truly believed them until now. "This can't be real. This has to be a nightmare," Henry said in disbelief. The devil chuckled, a sound that sent shivers down Henry's spine. "Oh, it's very real, and you, my dear Henry, are here for eternity." Henry fell to his knees, his mind reeling. "Please, there must be something I can do. I'll give it all back, the money, the power. Just let me go." "You had your chance, Henry. You made the deal, and now you must live with the consequences. There is no escape from this place. No reprieve. This is your fate." Henry's heart pounded in his chest and tears filled his eyes. He had been a fool, blinded by greed and desperation, and now he was paying the ultimate price. But the devil had no mercy. With a wave of his hand, the ground beneath Henry's feet opened up, revealing a pit of fire and brimstone. The heat was unbearable, and Henry could feel the flames licking at his skin, burning him alive. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, as he was dragged down into the pit, the flames consuming him, burning him, torturing him. And as Henry's soul was swallowed by the flames, the devil watched with satisfaction. Henry Caldwell was never seen again. His mansion stood empty, a dark and scary presence in the city. People whispered that it was cursed, that anyone who entered would meet a terrible fate. But few knew the truth that Henry had made a deal with the devil and paid the ultimate price. His soul was now trapped in hell, condemned to suffer for all eternity, a cautionary tale for those who would dare to make a bargain with forces beyond their understanding. They say that if you listen closely on a dark and stormy night, you can still hear his screams, echoing through the walls of his abandoned mansion, a chilling reminder of the devil's bargain and the terrible price it demands. But perhaps the most terrifying thought of all is this: Henry's story could be anyone's story. Would you be able to resist such an offer? Think about it. Until then, good night and sweet nightmares.